Hello, my students. We are looking at concept 5.3, money growth and inflation. What we're really looking at is the long run consequences of consistent expansionary monetary policy. In other words, what is the impact of consistently increasing the supply of money? And you might have heard this before when we're talking about inflation, because this is kind of the one part of supply side economics that is kind of gospel fact to everybody now. Whenever I say we're increasing the supply of money, you go, that's going to cause inflation. Well, so far it hasn't, right? It causes aggregate demand to shift to the right, closing recessionary gaps. So this is where that inflation argument actually comes from. Okay, so we call this the quantity theory of money. This idea that the amount of money that we put into the economy matters beyond just manipulating the interest rate. It actually can cause issues. The issue that monetarists mainly, who are the people that are proponents of this idea, the issue that monitors have with this idea is that when you have discretionary changes in supply money, namely when you increase the supply of money, it actually creates these booms and busts in our economy. So our economy temporarily gets better, right, which is the goal of expansionary supply of money, but in the long run actually crashes again, and all we're left with are the higher prices that we got, right? So the idea looks like this. In the short run, you know this line of logic already. Increase in supply money pushes down interest rates, pushes up investment, increase in GDP. Our demand shifting to the right, price levels rise. Got it? But in the long run, something changes. The secondary effect is in that very same market. When we have an increase in GDP or increase in national income, we know that that's actually a determinant or shifter in the demand for money. We need more money for transactions to buy all the goods and services that are being produced, right? The demand for money shifts to the right. When demand for money shifts to the right, interest rates rise again. So they just fell before, but now they're rising. When they rise, investment falls and aggregate demand falls. So aggregate demand shifts to the left. Now, normally, yes, that results in a decrease in GDP and a crash in our economy, but it actually doesn't push our prices down. We normally show when average demand shifts to the left, price level falling, but in reality, in practice, prices are sticky downwards. Businesses don't like to lower their prices. And so we are kind of stuck with the higher prices of this and left with another crash. And does the Federal Reserve respond to this? They just increase the supply of money again to offset that increasing interest rates and get us back to where we were. Done over a long period of time, this has the possibility of, in best case scenario, creating booms and crashes, making our business cycle worse. In the worst case scenario, it could potentially trigger hyperinflation as we continually push prices up, but GDP is not rising in the long run. So, to back up this whole idea that it looks like it's GDP, but really it's prices, monetarists use something called the equation of exchange. The equation of exchange is MV equals PQ. Money supply times the velocity of money equals price level times the quantity produced. Really, really important to know. P times Q is actually nominal GDP. That goes back to unit 2, right? Price times quantity, nominal GDP. GDP not corrected for inflation, right? So oftentimes you'll see this equation written as M times V equals nominal GDP. Samesies, right? Now, money supply, you know what that is. But what is the velocity of money? The velocity of money is the amount of times a dollar is spent in a given year. Velocity of money. So if $1 goes into the economy and is spent 4 times in that given year, then that $1 bought $4 worth of goods and services. Velocity of money, right? So you take your money supply times the amount of times those dollars were actually spent in our economy that year, and that gives you an idea of how much money was spent on our nominal GDP, right? Now, here's the deal. When we do expansionary monetary policy, the supply of money goes way, way up. Now, in order for this to work, monetarists believe that the velocity of money is actually relatively stable. Yes, it changes a little bit, but it's very predictable in how it changes. In addition, they believe that the quantity being produced is actually stable. Our GDP increases in a very predictable growth rate. We know pretty much what the next quarter's economic growth is going to be. We're pretty good at guessing it at this time. So that's relatively stable. So when the Federal Reserve increases the money supply, if quantity is not changing, what is? And the answer is price level. So it looks like nominal GDP is going up, but in fact, the only thing that is going up is price level. And so the danger of Fed policy or of monetary policy is that this consistent increase in the supply of money, as noted here, results in the dangerous increases in price level over time, which can cause, in the best case scenario, artificial understanding of our GDP, worst case scenario, hyperinflation. Okay, break it down a little bit further. So, again, like I said before, monitors believe that the velocity of money is stable. And they also believe that real GDP actually grows at a very constant rate, right? So, those two things, the V and the Q, are stable, which means when you impact the M, you're only going to cause an increase in the P. Change in the supply of money only results in an increase in the price level or causes inflation. So what they say we should actually do is something called the monetary rule, and you don't need a Federal Reserve for the monetary rule. The monetary rule is, hey, we can predict the increase in real GDP growth, 3%, 4%, something like that. All we need to do is increase supply of money by that same amount. If real GDP is going up by 4%, we increase the supply of money by 4%. What that does is it gives people enough money to buy those new goods and services without causing inflation. In other words, we're not putting too much money out there, which drives up prices, but not increase in quantity. So quantity theory or the monetary rule is what monetarists promote using quantity theory of money equation, M times V equals P times Q, or M times V equals nominal GDP. They utilize that to say, hey, we should really promote this monetary rule, which is we tie changes in supply of money to changes in quantity. So if we go back to that previous slide, maybe we'll come back to that problem. You're gonna work for me. There we go. If we go back here, what they're saying is we know a quantity is going to go up by like 2%, for example, right? We want to keep price level stable. We know that velocity is relatively stable. And so we believe you should increase the money supply by 2%. Because if I increase this by 2% and quantity by 2%, then I'm not going to cause inflation. Inflation is not going to occur. That's the fix. Federal Reserve has this artificial understanding of how the economy works. And through doing it, they think they're making a difference, but actually they're only having temporary short run gains. Long run, that's becoming undone. And in the long run, it can create inflation. Worst case scenario, fool's gold, right? This idea that it's going well when it's not. Worst case, or that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is hyperinflation, right? But the problem is recently the velocity of money has actually fluctuated pretty wildly, right? And that kind of messes up the whole equation of exchange, right? So from, if you check this out, from 1950 all the way through like 1990, there's a very consistent increase, predictable increase, a nice constant curve here of velocity of money. But then in about 1990, things started getting wild. We had a dramatic decrease and up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. So velocity of money actually has started to be less stable, which messes up this entire theory. Not so clean. But again, the greatest critique of monetary policy. Okay, we're going to tuck in concept 5.4 as well, which is government deficit and national debt. And these are the long run consequences of expansionary fiscal policy. We already said that the crowding out effect is the greatest critique of expansionary fiscal policy, but government deficits and national debt is the greatest consequence of expansionary fiscal policy. So what are we talking about? Well, we know that deficit, surplus, and debt are all different things. So annually, a budget deficit is when the government spends more money than tax revenue that comes in, right? And that gets added to our national debt. So every year you can run a deficit as long as you're spending more than you're bringing in. So if I make $10,000 a year and I spend $50,000 a year, then I have a deficit of $40,000, right? Expansionary fiscal policy, whether it's discretionary or non discretionary, actually grows or creates budget deficits because government spending is going up, tax revenue is going down. So I'm bringing in less money and I'm spending more money, and that creates deficits. We also have something, there you go, just said that. We also have something called a budget surplus, which is the other thing that you can have annually. We haven't had one of these in a long, long time, but a budget surplus means you're spending less money than you're bringing in. So if I bring in $40,000 and I only spend $10,000, then I have a surplus of $30,000. And this surplus actually pays down our national debt. And contractionary fiscal policy actually adds to surpluses. So when I decrease my government spending or I increase taxes. Increase in taxes bringing in more revenue. Decrease in government spending is taking down my spending. That creates budget surpluses. These things accumulate over time, creating national debt. National debt is all of the budget surpluses and all of the budget deficits over or since the history of the United States began, right? So over that time. Remember, the big key takeaway here is whenever you have expansionary fiscal policy, whenever there's an increase in government spending, decreases in taxes, it creates short run deficits and adds to long run national debt. Okay, so try this out. Go ahead and pause your video, see if you can answer these questions, and we'll do them together. And hopefully, you're coming out on the right side of this. Okay, and we're back. Let's try this out. So, non discretionary fiscal policy in a recessionary gap. Non discretionary means progressive taxes, transfer payments, things like that, right? We know when we're in a recessionary gap, that's going to result in a decrease in taxes, tax revenue, right? Which has expansionary effect. It's going to be an increase in transfer payments. So more people are on welfare, so more people are getting those payments from the government. That is expansionary effect. Both of those things cause an increase in aggregate demand. Aggregate demand going to the right causes an increase in real GDP. When real GDP and aggregate demand are going to the right, that's also an increase in price level. What's happening in my budget? Well, my budget for the year is going towards a deficit. And when I have deficits, what happens to my national debt? It grows. Notice, aggregate demand, real GDP, price level all go up. A deficit occurs, and that adds to my accumulation of deficits and surpluses and creates more national debt. When I have an inflationary gap, number two, then that means people are paying more taxes. So tax revenue is going up, more money coming in, and there are fewer transfer payments, so less money is going out, less spending. So what's happening? Well, those two things have contractionary effect. So our demand is going to shift to the left because government spending is down and tax revenue is up. In addition, real GDP is going to fall along with price level. What happens with my budget? Well, I just created a surplus, right? I have more money coming in. I have less money going out. That creates or moves us at least towards a surplus. So what happens to my national debt? Well, surplus, as we know, pay down our national debt. That is actually going to fall when we have a surplus. But it's all down arrows. Let's say we have more discretionary fiscal policy, which means we have tax cuts and government spending going up. Both of those things cause an increase in deficit, right? When tax cuts go down, that has an expansionary effect. People have more money, but it means less revenue for the government, and government spending increases. So both of those things cause an increase in aggregate demand. Of course, that pushes up GDP. Of course, that pushes up price level. What happens to our budget? Well, that creates a deficit because less money coming in with tax cuts, more money going out with government spending, and national debt rises. Final one, contractionary fiscal policy is the opposite. When taxes go up, more money is coming in, and government spending cuts means less money is going out. This has a contractionary effect. The C and the G of Sig-Jigsaw are falling. Real GDP falls along with that. Price level falls, although price level is actually sticky, but we'll get to that later. And as a result, we create a surplus as more money is coming in and less money is going out. And that surplus helps us pay down national debt. Okay, if you got that, you're good to go on this concept. That is really it. Okay, and there's the final key for you, a little prettier than what I just did. That's it. Check out the Khan Academies. I will see you in class where we will go over these concepts in a little bit more detail and I'll emphasize certain things. Peace to you and yours. Talk soon.